are invited to a murder. A stranger lies dead in Arlington Grange. There are 6 suspects, but which one is the killer? Could it be Mrs. Peacock, lady of the manor and beautiful society hostess? Perhaps Colonel Mustard, military hero and intimate family friend? Is Reverend Green a saint or sinner? Is it Professor Plum, a man with a degree of suspicion? Miss Scarlet, Mrs. Peacock's glamorous stepdaughter? Or Mrs. White, loyal housekeeper and devoted confidant?
And here is your host for Cluedo, Richard Madeley.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Hello, good evening, and welcome to Cluedo. Now, a murder has been committed at Arlington Grange. Can you solve the case and unmask the killer? Well, trying to do exactly that here in the studio are celebrity detectives tonight, consumer sleuth Lynn Fowles-Wood and the man used to asking questions, Nicholas Parsons.
Thank you.
And here to challenge them, we've got TV presenter Sarah Kennedy and actor and quizmaster Jonathan Morris. So good luck to both teams of detectives tonight. Cluedo, of course, tests your powers of observation and of logic as you try to work out who committed the murder, with which weapon, and in which room. And as an extra bonus, we'll be giving you the chance to win a thrilling murder mystery weekend in our special competition. But before that, we've got a murder to solve. And to help you on your way, I can reveal some initial clues. We do know that the killer used one of these 6 weapons. Was it the croquet mallet, the stocking, the bow and arrows, the fossil, the meat cleaver, or the poker? I can also reveal at this early stage that the victim was killed in one of these 6 rooms. Was it the dining room, the drawing room, the billiard room, the library, the kitchen, or did it all happen in the study? Well, let's examine the crucial evidence so far, the events that lead us up to the murder. European multimillionaire Max Gold has ambitious plans for Arlington Grange, so he's made Mrs. Peacock an offer she can't refuse.
That's cheating, Reverend Green.
Oh, I'm so sorry, Miss Scarlet.
A man after my own heart.
Well, exchange of contracts, duly witnessed. Congratulations.
Thanks. Mrs. Peacock. £200,000, 10% of purchase price.
Thank you.
My lawyers will bring the balance in the morning and we finalize the deal. Now, I know you all want to hear my plans for Arlington Grange. Your traditions and history are all very fine, but they don't provide employment or profit. You're all living in the middle of last century. I, Max Gold, will show you the future. Ladies and gentlemen, the Merrie England in heart.
A circus. You are turning this into a cheap circus. You cannot do this.
Mrs. Peacock, from tomorrow morning I can do exactly as I please.
It's an outrage. I won't let it happen.
May I have a word, Mr. Gold?
Of course.
Mrs. Peacock very kindly promised the church the 5-acre field as an extension to the graveyard, and I was wondering
Out of the
if it was...
question, my dear Reverend, that's where a funfair is going.
What? A funfair? Next to my church?
And scenic railway.
See, I've never heard anything like it. I mean, sacrilege.
Nonsense, Reverend. My railway will bring more visitors to your church in 10 minutes than you would normally see in 10 years.
He's a complete Philistine. He's going to destroy something that's irreplaceable.
Can't stand in the way of progress. Isn't that what you always say?
Progress? Curing cancer is progress. Selling people what they don't need is exploitation.
Well, no one's forcing them. People can choose not to come.
Well, I choose to have nothing to do with it.
I have never been so insulted in all my life.
Oh, now what's happening?
That man had the nerve to offer me a job.
A job?
Yes, he actually suggested I might make an excellent waitress in his maid Marian cocktail bar.
You're joking.
I could strangle him. How could you sell our house to a man like that?
Well, quite simply, Vivian, I couldn't afford to maintain it.
Well, this place is meant to be my inheritance. I mean, what am I supposed to do?
I'm sorry. I had no choice.
Well, I have got a choice, and I'm not going to stand for it.
Look, Gold, we had an agreement.
I agreed to nothing, but it may be a tough job for you.
Yes, what sort of job?
I see in you qualities of leadership.
Yes, well, that's the British Army for you. Training, discipline, you know.
Oh, you remind me of the greatest British hero of all.
Ah, I know what you mean. Yes, we shall fight them on the beaches. We shall never surrender.
No, much greater than him. Here, start practicing.
Practicing what?
You, Colonel Mustard, are to play key role in this venture. I want you to be Merrie England's very own Robin Hood.
Oh, not interrupting, am I?
No, not at all. We've quite finished.
Come in, Professor. Come in, come in. Magnificent fossils.
Please, be careful. There isn't a dig in the grounds.
Yes. Such a pity. We must close it down.
What do you mean?
That land is for water park.
You can't build there. It's an important archaeological site. I'll go to the press and expose you.
That's no way to talk to your employer.
I wouldn't dream of working for a man like you.
Professor, you have been working for me for some time.
Don't be ridiculous.
You are a consultant to Swiss pharmaceutical company,
Yes?
which I own. If you don't believe me, call Professor Steiner in Zurich.
Devil, that's what he is. He's tempted Mrs. Peacock with all that money. Now he wants to destroy everything that matters to me. My home, my job, people I care about.
My dear Mrs. White, you do me an injustice. I'm sure I can find some sort of a job for you.
What do you mean?
We'll need assistance in our new fast food restaurant. No doubt you can make excellent hamburgers.
I can assure you, no one wants to put a stop to this man's appalling plans more than I.
You want to bet?
He has to be stopped, whatever the cost.
Your objections are futile. You're all powerless.
Oh, really? We'll see how powerless I am. I'm going to call my lawyer.
Oh, jolly good.
She's wasting her time. We've exchanged contracts.
Excuse me, Professor Plum, there's a phone call from Zurich.
Aha. You decided to check my credentials?
Don't you see, Gold? Nobody wants your scheme anymore. Give it up.
I never give up. We complete in the morning. By the way, where are those contracts?
Perhaps Mrs. White tidied them away.
She has no right to touch them. Where's that woman?
Contracts, of course.
And I wonder what you're thinking.
Yes, well, suppose we found them first.
And they just accidentally fell into the fire.
Brilliant. Yeah. You search here. I'll look for Mrs. White.
If that doesn't work.
Thank you, Professor Steiner. If Mr. Gold can withdraw my funding without notice, then I have no option. I know what to do now.
What's the matter? It's after 7, Mum. I must serve dinner now. Oh, very well. I suppose we can't really wait.
Did you find them?
No.
You all right, my dear?
Just found Max Gold and, don't think he'll be wanting any dinner.
Why ever not?
He's dead. He's been murdered.
So, the Merry England theme was murder. But who killed Max Gold? Well, only two people in this studio know that. I'm one of them, and the other, of course, is the killer, who is one of these 6 suspects. Double-crossed, did Colonel Mustard decide to make a financial killing? Did Mrs. Peacock kill to preserve the past? Or was it Miss Scarlet to protect her future? Did Mrs. White invest in murder to save her home and her job? Did the Reverend Green sell his soul to save his church? Or did Professor Plum fund his future by burying gold? So there they are, our 6 suspects, 6 possible murder weapons, and 6 possible rooms where it happened. So, studio detectives, based on the evidence that we've heard so far, I want your gut instinctive feelings about this case, and we'll start with Lynn and Nicholas.
Well, we find our guts didn't actually coincide on this.
Yes, we've pulled our guts.
So we've pulled guts. And for the police, we've gone for the library.
And we think he was chopped to giblets with a meat cleaver.
And they were all so guilty we didn't know what to do, but the joint gut came out for that Colonel Mustard.
Colonel Mustard?
Yes.
All right, so let's move across now to Sarah and Jonathan.
A thoroughly unsavoury lot. It was obviously done in the library with the bow and arrow, and I will leave my colleague here to...
Miss Scarlet.
Yes.
Miss Scarlet?
Yes.
All right, let's just take a breath here, because we're moving on to round 1. And this is where our studio sleuths are going to cross-examine all the suspects. But before they begin, I've got to give you one vital piece of information. Only the murderer can lie. All the others have to be telling the truth at all times. So, Lynn and Nicholas, would you like to start the cross-examination, please?
Colonel Mustard, when you left the room, was it the dining room?
Yes,
And you said you were going to look for the contract.
indeed.
Could you just retrace your steps, tell us where you went?
Yes, I went to the kitchen to ask Mrs. White if she had inadvertently misplaced the contracts while tidying. She hadn't. Then I returned to the dining room, and Vivian had no joy, so I conducted a very detailed search myself.
Let's move across now, please, to Sarah and Jonathan.
Yes, I'd like to ask Professor Plum a question. You received a phone call from Zurich, I believe, and I quote, you said, "Now I know what to do." My question is, where did you go after you made the call?
I stayed exactly where I was. And I called other colleagues all around the world. I had to address other foundations to locate sources of finance, since obviously we despised Max Gold. So I didn't go anywhere. I stayed there making
Thank you,
calls.
Professor Plum.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Professor. Another cross-examination question, please, from Lynn, Nicholas.
Yes, the Reverend Green. Now, he's a man of the cloth, yet he cheats at croquet. Terrible behaviour. You were in the kitchen with the meat cleaver. You didn't take it with you anywhere as a souvenir of your visit?
Oh, no. I often sit in the kitchen with Blanche and cook away, don't I?
I've given the Greens to do sometimes.
Yeah.
Let's move across now, please, to Sarah and Jonathan.
And Miss Scarlet, you said, we saw you. You were sitting there with that stocking top, and you said you'd strangle him. So how far would you go then, Miss Scarlet, to save your inheritance?
Well, there's 2 parts to this, because I didn't say that I'd strangle him. But to answer your question, Arlington Hall is my inheritance, and I would go to, well, I wouldn't murder a man, but to protect my own interests, I would do whatever was or would be necessary.
To almost any length?
Not murder.
Thank you very much indeed, Miss Scarlet. Nicholas, your third and final question.
Mrs. White, you came in to announce that dinner was ready. You heard the two in the dining room talking about the contracts, and you gave a very suspicious look. Why did you react to that?
The contracts meant nothing to me. I had not seen the contracts. I simply didn't want to talk to that man, that disgusting foreigner who can't even pronounce Arlington Grange, let alone look after it properly.
OK, thank you for that. And we'll have one more question now from Sarah and Jonathan.
Yes, Mrs. Peacock, you went to make a phone call. Where did you make the phone call?
I made it in my study. I called my lawyer, which was a very unsatisfactory phone call, because he'd told me there was nothing I could do about the situation. And then I went up to my room to compose myself and come down for dinner afterwards.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We've heard from all of our 6 suspects, but now our studio detectives have got to make a deduction. Now, a completely correct one at this stage would be, well, very impressive. But of course, an entirely incorrect deduction is very valuable because it eliminates a room, a weapon, and a suspect from our investigation. So, Lynn and Nicholas, I want you to tell me, in which room was Max Gold killed, with which weapon, and who do you think committed the murder?
I'm better at double glazing salesman, but we think it was now the study, the meat cleaver, and Colonel Mustard.
Mustard. All right, let's move across now to Sarah and Jonathan. I want to know the place, the weapon, and the killer.
Right. Well, we're being loyal to the library, especially to the bow and arrow, but we're changing our attention from that little vixen over there in the green and turning our attention to this one here, Professor Plum.
Professor Plum? You think Plum's the killer? All right, let's go back to Lynn and Nicholas, remind ourselves of their deductions. You said that you thought the murder was committed in the study with the meat cleaver, and it was Colonel Mustard. Well, I can tell you you've got 1 out of 3 of those deductions correct, but I can't tell you which one. Let's move back again to Sarah and Jonathan. You said the murder was committed in the library with the bow and arrow, and that it was Professor Plum. Well, none of those deductions is correct. So, at the end of round 1, we can now definitely eliminate from our inquiries the library, the bow and arrows, and of course, Professor Plum. Professor Plum, you're entirely cleared of all and any suspicion. Yes. All right, there we have to leave our investigations for a couple of minutes, but we will continue the inquiry into the murder of Max Gold in part 2 of the programme. So please join us after the break. Welcome back to part 2 of Cluedo, where we're on the track of a killer. We're trying to find out who murdered European multimillionaire Max Gold, with which weapon and in which room at Arlington Grange. And here's what we've discovered so far. We've definitely eliminated the library, the bow and arrows, and Professor Plum is cleared of all suspicion. But we still have 5 possible rooms, 5 possible weapons, and 5 remaining suspects. But before our studio detectives continue to question the suspects and, of course, the witness, we can examine some very important new evidence that's just come to light. First of all, we'll join Mrs. Peacock and Miss Scarlett in the drawing room.
I'm sorry. I had no choice.
Well, I do have a choice, and I'm not going to put up with it.
I had no idea you felt so strongly. Then, of course, all this would have been yours one day.
What would happen if he wasn't able to complete the deal? Would you be able to keep the deposit?
Yes, I imagine so.
And Arlington Grange.
I see, Roy. Well, thank you. If there's absolutely nothing that can be done about this sale, then I'll just have to make the best of it. Somehow.
Well, our studio sleuths will now put this fresh evidence to good use. In round 2, they can cross-examine any suspect or the witness, Professor Plum, that they want to, but each question and answer has to be followed immediately by a deduction. So we're going to start, first of all, with Lynn and Nicholas.
Well, we want to ask the Scarlet Woman something.
Yes.
Before the murder, you were in the dining room. Where did you go after that?
I went to look for the contracts, but I started looking in the dining room. Then I was on my way to really go and discuss things with Mrs. White, since she tidies up. And that was when I unfortunately came across the body.
All right, no more questions for the moment. I'd like a deduction, please.
Well, we're not very convinced by that. I'm sorry, Miss Scarlett.
Well, I'm sorry for you
So
too.
we still think it took place in the study. But we are changing our ideas, and we think it was the croquet mallet, because that was left in the study.
By the Reverend.
By the Reverend. And we think that Miss Scarlett went in there and used that croquet mallet to good effect.
Yeah.
All right, now, just stop there, please. You said you thought the murder was committed in the study?
Yes.
With a croquet mallet?
Yes.
And that Miss Scarlett's the killer?
Yes.
Well, I can tell you that 2 out of 3 of those deductions are correct. 2 out of 3.
Oh.
Let's move across now to Sarah and Jonathan. A question for one of our suspects or the witness, please.
Yes, I'd like to ask Mrs. Peacock a question. Now, you were having a conversation in the dining room with Miss Scarlett, and she pointed out to you quite rightly that if the deal didn't go through, then of course you would inherit the money and not lose the house, etc., etc. Now, how did this affect the telephone conversation that you had later?
Well, it's obviously if the sale of the house did not go through, I might have retained the money, but that wasn't about to take place because, as I explained to you earlier, when I did call my lawyer, he told me there was no question that the sale of the house had to go through. That was the written contract, and there was nothing I could do about it.
All right, there's your explanation. What's your deduction now?
We think it was the study, a fossil, and Scarlet.
Oh, you're still saying it's Miss Scarlet. She certainly is the popular lady today. So you say the study, the fossil, and you too, like Lynn and Nicholas, are going for Miss Scarlet. 1 out of 3. You've got 1 out of 3 deductions right. But remember, on their last deduction, Lynn and Nicholas got 2 out of 3 correct. So I wonder if you can draw any conclusions from that. Right. Another question now, please, from Lynn and Nicholas.
Well, we want to ask a question to Reverend Green.
Yes.
We've had our suspicions about you for a long time. Where did you go when you left the kitchen?
I never went anywhere. I stayed in the kitchen for the whole duration of the time until we found the body.
Well, he sounds very sure. Would you like to make a deduction?
Yes,
we don't believe him.
We don't believe that.
We think he bumped off
That's
Max
right.
Gold with a croquet mallet, which he chucked away
Right.
earlier.
And so our deduction is it happened in the study, and the instrument was the croquet mallet. He knew where it was, and I'm afraid I accuse you, sir, of being the murderer. Reverend Green.
Wow. All right, so you both think it was the study, it was the croquet mallet, and it was the Reverend Green. Well, I can tell you, you've got 2 out of 3 of those deductions correct. Well done. Oh. Now, on their previous deduction, Lynn and Nicholas said the study, the croquet mallet, and Miss Scarlet, and got 2 out of 3 correct then. So surely that tells us that the hunt is now on to find the murderer. Sarah and Jonathan.
And ask Mrs. Peacock, because I've got a slight idea here. You left a very, very long pause after the telephone conversation. Why?
I was distraught. I couldn't believe that this was going to happen here at Arlington Grange. I mean, the whole thing appalls me.
So, please, I'd like your deduction based on her reply.
Oh.
Study?
Definitely the study. Definitely the mallet.
Definitely. And look at them, 3 women there. I say the one who had the most to lose, Jacques Peacock.
All right.
Oh, I can't believe that, Sarah. I really can't.
Well, I'm afraid they have said that, and I can now tell you that it was the study, it was the croquet mallet, and it was Mrs. Peacock.
Whoa.
Yes, I did it. And I can't say I'm sorry. I feel I performed a public service. Well, someone had to. And as I'd started the whole mess in the first place, I thought it was my job to clear it up. If only I could have stopped the sale. But my solicitor said no, and I had no choice. And I did think the deposit would come in frightfully handy to pay for the maintenance. I mean, you should see the bills. Anyway, when that odious creature came into my study looking for his contracts, I simply imagined his head was a croquet ball that I wanted to send out of bounds, and I let fly. You see, what Arlington Grange stands for is irreplaceable. I could give it up, but I couldn't let that oaf spoil it for future generations. Oh, it's England. Croquet on the lawn, tea in silver teapots, sherry before dinner. One simply has to maintain one's standards.
So, it was Mrs. Peacock who killed Max Gold in the study, and she used the croquet mallet. My apologies to the other 5. You are, of course, completely innocent and free to go. Thank you for staying and helping us with our inquiries. And we have to say warm congratulations to Sarah and Jonathan, who did very well and made the final correct deduction, and commiserations to Lynn and Nicholas. You came very close. A warm round of applause for playing a good game of Cluedo. Thank you. Thank you all very much. Right, I hope that you've enjoyed playing Armchair Detective at home. In just a few moments, I'll be giving you the number for our special competition with a chance to win a murder mystery weekend. We're going to be back next week with another murder to solve, but for now, from all of us here on Cluedo, it's a very good night to you. Good night.
The answer to last week's competition was B. Reverend Green went back to the study after the final séance to collect his exorcism bag. And last week's winner was Mrs. Linda Taylor from Southend.